Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. I am so glad you could join us. Today, we're taking a really fascinating and honestly deeply important journey. We're going from the micro to the macro. We're going to start by looking closely at the visceral, on-the-ground realities that vulnerable communities face every single day. And then, we'll slowly zoom all the way out to examine the sweeping national economic data that actually defines our country's growth. It's a journey that connects the daily lived experiences of everyday workers directly to the massive economic engines of our nation. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's dive into this. This is our roadmap for today. First, Tiruvalur's ammonia nightmare. Second, the forgotten Kotputli magicians. Third, state policies and politics. And finally, number 4, tracking national economic growth. Starting off with Section 1, Tiruvalur's ammonia nightmare, an industrial tragedy. To really ground us in this reality, I want you to imagine the scene here. There's an anhydrous ammonia tanker parked right outside a seafood processing factory in the Tiruvallur district. Now, this was June 21st, a seemingly routine Sunday morning. Inside, you've got 80 migrant workers busy on the ground floor just sorting and cleaning shrimp for export. Upstairs, about 60 women who had literally just finished their night shift were fast asleep in their quarters. Right next to them, this crucial refrigeration machinery was humming away, relying on massive amounts of ammonia to keep those export products fresh. Well, this industrial setting is exactly where a quiet Sunday morning turned into an absolute nightmare. Looking at how this escalated on June 21st, it is just terrifying. First, as temperatures and pressure build up, an ammonia pipeline suddenly ruptures. Next, within moments, a thick, highly toxic gas spreads and floods the entire first floor. Imagine the sheer terror here. Women waking up gasping, unable to see, eyes and throats burning, completely disoriented in the smoke. And because emergency services were delayed in arriving, step 3 happens: rescue attempts by the male workers downstairs. They realized what was happening and bravely took matters into their own hands. Wrapping wet cloths around their faces, they repeatedly ran into that toxic cloud to pull their colleagues to safety, holding their breath for just 20 seconds at a time before having to retreat. Finally, the emergency services arrived. The human stakes here are just unimaginable. Listen to these words from Polina, a young survivor from Assam who had only been working at the factory for a few months. She says, "The gas quickly spread and filled the entire room. We couldn't breathe properly, and there was a severe burning sensation in our eyes and mouth." That really captures the absolute terror these women experienced. They were trapped, suffocating, and relying entirely on the frantic rescue efforts of their fellow workers. So, the crucial point is, this wasn't just some sudden, unavoidable accident, right? It was the result of deep, underlying, systemic failures. The investigation revealed horrific gaps in the safety nets at this factory. First off, forged Aadhaar cards for minors. Many of the workers were vulnerable tribal migrants from places like Odisha, Assam, and Jharkhand. Next, despite earning meager wages, we're talking around 14,000 rupees for grueling 12-hour shifts, any medical expenses were deducted straight from their paychecks. And worse still, inadequate safety protocols. Workers reported that minor gas leaks had actually occurred before, but they were completely ignored. It was these ignored warnings and exploitative conditions that ultimately allowed this disaster to claim 16 lives. Now, moving to Section 2, the forgotten Kotputli magicians, lives in transit. And this brilliantly illustrates the stark contrast and the broken promises of urban development. On one hand, look at the squalid transit camp at Anand Parbat. This is where 2,800 families of traditional performers and magicians from Delhi's Kotputli colony have been stuck living for 12 years. They were moved there between 2014 and 2017, and it was promised as a temporary stay. But then, across town, sits a stalled Delhi Development Authority construction site in Shadipur. The developer was supposed to build economically weaker section flats for them, but work has been paused for months. So these artists are stuck in this squalid limbo, forced to rely on water tankers in a camp that is plagued by open drains. That feeling of hopelessness is heartbreakingly captured by Prakash Bhatt, a 58-year-old puppeteer at the camp. He perfectly summarizes their plight with a line from local folklore. He says, "6 mahine ka vada karke saal bhar na aaye," which translates to, after promising 6 months, you didn't even show up in a year. Because they've been displaced for so long, these traditional performers have lost their addresses, which means they've lost their audiences and ultimately their livelihoods. It's a powerful reminder of how slow-moving policy directly impacts cultural heritage and human dignity. That brings us to Section 3,
State policies and politics, legal actions and agreements. Let's look at a highly publicized legal and political situation unfolding in Uttar Pradesh. Factually speaking, in the Ayodhya embezzlement case, 8 individuals were recently arrested and sent to 14 days of judicial custody. Interestingly, it's reported that the State Bank of India actually advised changing the cash counting staff 3 months prior to these arrests. Now, on the other side of the ledger, this has ignited a massive political backlash. Opposition parties are heavily targeting the ruling BJP over alleged donation theft, and Congress even sent a delegation of MPs to visit Ayodhya. Meanwhile, the BJP is hitting back, defending those who have dedicated their lives to the temple's construction. So we're seeing intense political crossfire over these factual arrests. But while there is political friction in some areas, we also see policy breakthroughs in others. The historic signing of the Yamuna Water Project Agreement is a perfect example of this. After nearly 3 decades, yes, 30 years, of disputes over the allocation of surface flow from the river stemming back to a 1994 memorandum, Haryana and Rajasthan have finally inked a pact. Overseen by the Union Home Minister, this agreement will facilitate an underground pipeline system to effectively utilize water allocations. It is a real game-changer that resolves a massive, long-standing issue for the people in both states.
Meanwhile, over in West Bengal, state policy is taking a different shape. The state government announced it will introduce a bill to implement the Uniform Civil Code, but with some very specific parameters. The government explicitly stated that Adivasis, indigenous people, Kurmis, and other recognized ancient tribal communities will be entirely excluded from the proposed law. It's a significant legislative move aiming to unify family laws while strictly maintaining specific exemptions for the state's tribal populations.
And that brings us to Section 4. Tracking national economic growth, the macro picture. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is a vital methodological shift the government has just made. When tracking industrial output, they are tweaking the new series of the Index of Industrial Production, or the IIP. Basically, they are discontinuing the use of the Wholesale Price Index for measuring value-based outputs. Instead, they're adopting the Producer Price Index, or PPI. Economists note this is a major change. It will materially affect how we view growth across segments like manufacturing, and it's likely going to lead to revisions in future GDP data. I know it's a technical shift, but it literally changes the lens through which we view our economy. And looking through that new lens, the latest numbers are in, and wow, they are significant. 5.1%. That is the growth in overall industrial activity recorded in May. That is a 5-month high. So let's break down exactly what is driving that 5.1%. The real standout sector here is electricity, which skyrocketed to a 2-year high of 9.9%. Why? Well, delayed monsoons and intense heat waves drove up power consumption across the entire nation. Meanwhile, manufacturing, which is the backbone of this index, posted a very healthy 5.5% growth. Economists attribute this manufacturing boost directly to a revival in domestic consumption. Specifically, people are buying more consumer durables, like autos, computers, and electronics. Which brings us full circle to our final thought for today's explainer. We started on the factory floor in Tiruvallur, where vulnerable, marginalized workers lost their lives processing exports for pennies, and we ended with a celebration of a 5.1% surge in national industrial growth. The macro numbers look absolutely fantastic, but they are built by the hands of the micro-level workers. So the question we must leave you with is this. As India's industrial output accelerates to new highs, how can policy ensure that the very workers driving this incredible macroeconomic growth are actually protected, valued, and kept safe? Thank you for learning with me today. Let that question linger, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.